Am I the butthole for not letting my niece host her wedding at my castle? 28 years ago, my wife and I combined our savings, most of which came from inheritance after my father's passing, and bought our castle in southern Europe. It was actually a derelict farmhouse with some land, but it has a small turret, so our family has always referred to it as the castle. My wife and I decided we'd rather have a small, basic house in our home country and focus our time and resources readying the castle for us to retire in and for our children to enjoy. It took years, but around the time our eldest was born, it was finally finished. It's not massive, 5 bedrooms and a small pool in the gardens, but it is our paradise. We've always allowed our families and friends to use it whenever they please, and have spent every summer vacation staying there with our children. Our only stipulation when people stay there is that the master bedroom is off limits. It takes up most of the 3rd floor, with the remaining bedrooms on the 2nd floor. A lot of my and my wife's belongings are in there, and it's also the room we have shared together for over 20 years. Recently, my niece got engaged and held an engagement party on Zoom at the weekend. When asked what ideas they'd had so far, she excitedly told me they'd actually been planning to ask us if they could hold the wedding at the castle. I was a bit taken aback but didn't want to outright refuse. I joked it would have to be a rather small wedding since they'd struggle to fit more than 25 people in the gardens. She gushed that she'd already thought it through and they'd put up canopies in the field nearby. We don't own that land, and if all the guests stayed in hotels in the town, she would arrange transport for us all to get to the villa. My wife and I bit our tongues, not wanting to make a fuss during their engagement celebration. But later, when my niece texted me to repeat what she'd said, I asked her to clarify the sleeping arrangements, and after some back and forth it came to light she plans to use the master bedroom as the bridal suite and for the wedding party to have the remaining rooms. My wife, children and I would have to stay elsewhere. I slept on my decision and spoke with my wife. On Sunday I responded and politely refused, saying it's too small and we aren't comfortable having anyone in our room. Both she and my sister blew up at me, telling me I was ruining her wedding and she'd always dreamed of marrying at the castle. My sister even said since I used my inheritance it's family property, which is obviously ridiculous. ETA, when we texted her on Sunday, we offered a compromise: no master bedroom, and either get permission/insurances to use the fields, or reduce guest count to 25. We even offered to host a small rehearsal too, but she rejected the offers. That is when we outright refused. NTA, do you know what your sister bought with her part of the inheritance? If so, good news, it's yours now. Be sure to let her know. I'm not sure what she used her money for. I know she used part of it for her degree. But there's nothing of hers I'd lay claim to. That's not how inheritance works. Of course it's not. But it's about using her own idiotic logic against her. Sorry. I missed the sarcasm. I'm a bit tense just now. Yeah, I shut her down pretty quickly in that regard. While yes, we've let them use our property freely over the years, that doesn't mean they own it. I agree. Maybe you shouldn't let them use it unsupervised anymore. Admittedly, it's rare now they would be there without us, as we all tend to go in the summer anyway. I think my sister and brother-in-law only stayed there alone maybe half a dozen times over the years. But whenever my wife and I aren't at the property, we always lock the hall door that leads to the master room, so it's never been an issue before. Fair enough, but you are on notice that it may be an issue now. It may be a good idea to get some security cameras for the common areas now. I'm sure they don't seem like the type, but this sort of entitlement always seems to escalate into poor choices. Yes. Especially after that family property line. You definitely need to protect yourself, and cameras/surveillance equipment are pretty cheap these days. After that line, all rights revoked. I wouldn't get cameras inside, they are hackable. Keep the privacy. Outside cameras though. 2 quick things. 1. Outside cameras are just as hackable, and I know you never said they weren't, I'm just clarifying. 2. Outside cameras might not help much if protecting the master bedroom is the goal. I love how everybody on Reddit always talks about how things are hackable or files can be modified or anything else like that, when the average person probably has no idea how to do any of it. NTA, of course, this is your decision and your property. Do you object to the idea of a wedding there, or is it more the proposed invasion of the master suite? I do wonder if there's a way you could let them use the property with the caveat that you or your family stay in the master suite. Maybe your children could camp out on the third floor with you for a couple nights, while the bride gets a nice suite at a local hotel for the wedding night. It sounds like your niece really needs to iron out details first before making a decision, if you're open to it. How many guests? What is her budget? The plan would definitely hinge on whether they could rent the field from the neighbor, and iron out logistics. With a large wedding in a non-wedding venue, they will have to consider that the cost of bringing in everything, portable toilets, generators, sound, dance floor, tenting, lighting, staffing, tables and chairs, catering stuff, often ends up costing more than renting a dedicated wedding venue, sadly. At least in my experience, if you have a good relationship with family members, weddings at a family property can be super fun and special. I got married at a meaningful family property where I spent many vacations, and it was amazing. The whole family spent the night and some people camped out on the property in tents, many people slept out in the barn, the floors were packed with cousins, and it was a blast. After the wedding was over and the older generation retired, we had a late-night campfire and people ended up swimming in the pond. I'm so glad we were able to have a significant event in a place I loved, but it was quite expensive and complicated to figure everything out. We offered to still let her have the wedding there so long as she either got permission and insurances for the property next door or / the guest list. But she isn't willing to compromise on allowing us to stay there ourselves and wants my bedroom. The self-entitlement here is astounding. You are being really fair about it, more than fair actually. Also, I feel like the wedding will be a gateway to more requests from these entitled people to use the property whenever they want. And if Original Post decides to refuse in the future, he might be hearing, but we were able to do this before but you allowed us to use it last time. If their logic makes them believe they also somewhat own the property since it's from inheritance, then there's a possibility that Original Post will be faced with more requests in the future if he accepts this first one. NTA. You offered a compromise, but she has refused. This isn't just an extra property that you rent out, it is your second home and where you plan on retiring. Although I don't think it would be the end of the earth to accommodate them, the fact they expect you and your immediate family to rent hotel rooms to attend a wedding in your property is ridiculous. Also, all these plans hinge on her getting access to property that you don't own to host canopies. And not to mention that she will need access to the castle ahead of time to set up all the vendors and do walkthrough. It is a bigger commitment and expense than she realizes. Just an aside, you would also have to get some sort of event insurance policy to cover anyone getting injured or driving drunk or damaging the neighboring property. Something to consider too. Thank you, I hadn't even considered vendors and insurances, but you're completely right. I'm not even sure how you would even get that kind of insurance in that area. I think one of the reasons she is planning to use the fields is when the children were younger we let them play there, so I'm not sure if she now takes it for granted we can use that area, but a wedding is very different to 3 kids playing amongst the trees. Yeah, not the butthole at all up. The demand is over the top rude, selfish and frankly, insulting. It says a lot about her that on top of your place, and your private space, she's also just planning to casually use land belonging to somebody she doesn't even know to host the majority of the wedding. These kind of posts stress me out so much on behalf of the ops. I really hope you don't cave to her outrageous demands. Yeah, what the heck? They didn't even ask. They just assumed. That's very presumptuous. Let's not forget that there's the possibility of sexy time happening in Op's bedroom, and that would make anyone uncomfortable. It is a well-known fact that family doesn't have sex. Parents don't, siblings don't, and children don't. By extension, nieces and nephews don't. That's why we respect the privacy of their bedrooms and don't share them, to make sure this fact remains a fact. I'm not sure why anyone would want to spend their wedding night in their uncle's bed. There's a difference between kids running through the fields and people setting up to celebrate on the property, and without incredible luck, the owners of those fields would pop in to ask WTF is happening and call the police. If the vendors were even willing to agree to trespassing to set it up in the first place. This is Europe. You ask the owner of the field before you plan anything on it. And if that farmer is using that field for anything, he won't want it trampled on. Yes, there's a huge difference between a handful of kids occasionally running in a pasture to setting up canopies and porta potties for a couple of dozen, or more, adults to mill around for several hours, even more so if the field is one used for crops. I keep thinking that, If the niece agrees to OP's terms of not using the master, original post is still going to have to talk to all of the neighbors and make sure that the bride actually got permission to use their property. You don't want to retire to your dream home and discover all the neighbors think of you as the family that snuck a bunch of temporary toilets and some tents right into the middle of their barley field. You could do some serious damage to your relationships with your neighbors if something like this isn't handled with a lot of courtesy and caution. Yeah, definitely ask permission before getting carried away with the planning. We let neighbors use a patch of land that was beside their house for their daughter's wedding. It was in grass that year, so we were happy to help. My parents, being who they are, they said to donate some money to charity rather than directly charge for the use of the field. And we were all invited to the reception as well. To be honest, I'm more annoyed by the fact that original post seems to have let family use the field for years, as if it's his to offer instead of asking the landowner for permission. OP talked about playing between the trees, so it's an orchard of sorts. Doesn't give original post the right, but 3 kids playing won't do a lot of damage to the trees, at least. Where I grew up, Central Europe, so possibly different attitude to where OP's castle is, we would play on people's orchards all the time, nobody minded us, but having a wedding there is a whole different league. Honestly, from the way your sister and niece sounds, it's almost as if they've already planned out the wedding before you even agreed. Her assuming she is entitled to your property would be enough for me to say no, and probably never allow them, sister's family, access to your castle home without you also being there. You really should keep in mind how they seem to view your home as theirs when they ask to use it in the future, otherwise you'll probably keep having to deal with them making more demands for your property. But assume you did say yes from the way they seem to think they're entitled to the castle. I'm betting anything that this wedding won't be as simple as they may try and make you think. Sure, all they need is access to the entire house for 2 days, some canopies on land you don't own, and for you to have to pay for accommodations elsewhere. That's how they'll present it to you. Then it'll be, oh, make sure you hire a landscaper to change the garden to how I want it. Sorry, bridal party only. You can't come in your house at all, it's my day. Oh. You thought only 2 days? Sorry, we're taking over for a whole week before to set up and a week after for the bride and groom's honeymoon. And no, sorry, you can't come in during our wedding, or oh. We used expensive personal item only found in your master. Of course we're entitled to do whatever we want. It's my wedding. The reasons you gave for saying no were justification enough, but it would be remiss to assume that they wouldn't also would treat your castle as if we're actually theirs, and make even more unfair demands at you and your home's expense. I'd hate to see the aftermath of her wedding and the state they'd leave your castle when they were through. They obviously don't respect that it doesn't belong to them, so why would they respect the house itself? In addition, does the castle have adequate bathrooms for 70+ people? What about parking? This may be her dream, but that doesn't mean it's feasible. We thought about a backyard wedding. It was going to be way more expensive than just getting a venue. She could probably rent an actual castle for much less than going DIY with tenting, permits, insurance, restrooms, tables, chairs, a kitchen build-out, assuming your kitchen isn't huge, rentals, and God knows what else I'm forgetting. Oh man, the kitchen. This alone is important. You're not going to cook for any more than a dozen or so people unless you're already set up for it. Even if you pool electric griddles and so forth, they can't all run on the same circuit. People don't understand cooking for large families is nothing like cooking for an event. Unless a caterer preps and cooks the food elsewhere, this wedding won't really have a good option. But then you have the nightmare of timing and bringing in hot food from elsewhere. Good luck to you. Yeah, they would almost certainly need additional power from generators. More dollar. Yes. Doing it all from scratch is way more expensive and a huge pain. She seems really good about taking things for granted. It's called an event insurance policy. It would cover you for liability in the event that someone is injured on the premises while the wedding party is staying there and the event is taking place. Also, if alcohol is served, you would want host liquor liability. It might be worded differently in the UK. Not to mention, she still doesn't have approval from the owner of the fields where she wants to put up the tents. In addition to the above, you have a pool there, so if anyone would have access to it during the ceremony/reception, kids/small children, then you'd want a contract that stipulates a lifeguard in attendance. Honestly, it sounds like a huge liability exposure, not to mention an invasion of your privacy with use of the master. Definitely not the butthole. Yes, I came here to mention insurance. You could open yourself up to huge liability. The vendors you bring in might have their own for certain things, but that wouldn't cover everything. Also, even assuming all the things lined up, it's not like they have to sleep there. They can do the wedding and leave. Most people don't sleep at the venue the wedding is at except for destination weddings. NTA The fact they expect you and your immediate family to rent hotel rooms to attend a wedding in your property is ridiculous. Says it all. NTA. You took the high road multiple times here. During the Zoom meeting you bit your tongue. You slept on your decision without making it, and now your family has the audacity to make you feel bad? I would have a discussion with them on where you draw your boundaries, because they clearly crossed it by planning an entire wedding that banked on a property that isn't theirs. It banked on multiple properties that aren't theirs, as well as the pressure to say yes when asked in public. I despise people who spring things on others in public to try to bully them into agreeing. Usually ends with the person who is asking looking like a jackass but feeling justified in their indignation. It's a butthole tactic. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube. And share them with your friends. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. We welcome your comments below. Another of our videos will begin shortly.